What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Hoffman Show on a Wednesday here on the Team 980. Always live as well on the free Odyssey app. 45 minutes from right now, the commissioner of the WNBA, Cathy Englebert, will join us here on the radio show live. She's in town over at Entertainment Sports Arena for the Mystics game tonight against Atlanta. And we'll figure out what else she's in town to do and ask her about some of the league's hot topics. 45 minutes from right now, tell a friend, the commissioner of the WNBA, Cathy Englebert, will join us. Right now, though, we start with the MNBA, if you will, Anthony. The Minnesota Timberwolves survived last night, preventing the Dallas Mavericks from advancing. It is the first time ever that Kyrie Irving has lost a potential elimination game or a closeout game, better put, where his team has a chance to move on. He was 14-0. He's now 14-1, and he played a actual significant part in that. Just 16 points on the night for Irving, who has been tremendous otherwise in this series. Afterwards, Luka Doncic did the star player thing where he took the blame, even though Doncic had a ridiculous triple-double. What was it? 29, 15, and 10, I believe, were the stats by the end of it. But ultimately, it comes down to the stars on the other side. Minnesota gets tremendous production from Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns, specifically in the fourth quarter. It helps that Towns was actually on the floor in the fourth quarter after foul trouble limited him to just 30 minutes overall in the game. But in those 30 minutes, 25 points, 3 fourth-quarter threes, and Anthony, all of a sudden, the Wolves have life. Or do they? That's kind of the question here. Is this a delay of the inevitable? Or if you're Dallas, are you actually nervous? Like, is there anything you saw from Minnesota or Dallas that changed your mind on this series that makes you think that while your initial prediction, Anthony, of Wolves in 6 is mathematically impossible, that Wolves in 7 is still a thing that could happen?
Yes, Wolves in 7 is still a possibility. But also, same as, Mavs in 6. But I think yesterday, taking Anthony Edwards off of Kyrie was able to sort of kind of like preserve his legs and not necessarily tire himself out. The first 3 games, he said, hey, Kyrie's my guy. It didn't necessarily go his way, and, it tired him out when the fourth quarter came out. But being able to put him on Luka Doncic and, a guy like Jaden Daniels, who has a little bit more size.
I'm sorry, who? Is the Commanders quarterback all of a sudden playing?
Jaden McDaniels.
I'm sorry. I literally would never do that to you if you didn't wind up saying Jaden Daniels' name.
Yeah. Jaden McDaniels.
Jaden McDaniels.
Yes. Putting him on Kyrie, a little bit more rangy. Somebody Kyrie actually has to, shoot over. I think that was the difference in the game, to be honest. Of course, Karl Anthony Towns, him finally showing up, being able to hit some threes, but he just got to also just stay out of foul trouble. But I think defensively, those 2 adjustments, that sort of kind of helped the Wolves as the game went on. And I don't necessarily foresee Kyrie and Luka struggling as they did yesterday. They both shot 33% from the field. But maybe that's also a testament to, the defensive adjustment that they made. Who knows? I'm excited that the Wolves did not get swept, though. I wanted more basketball.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, this has been a terrific series. I mean, the all-timer in this category is the 2012 finals, where the Heat won in 5 games, but it was 5 really close games. And the reality is the Mavericks have won by 3 by 1. They pulled away late in game 3. That's a 9-point win. And then now they lose by 5. So we're talking overall through the 4 games, less than single digits, or not less than single digits, single-digit point differential in the series. So these have been close games. And as much as I kind of want to make fun of Anthony Edwards after game 3, I think he leaned over to Mike Conley or whoever he was talking to in the postgame, and the mics picked it up, and he's just like, or maybe even said this in the postgame, but he's like, I still can't believe, I still don't think they can beat us when we're at our best. And you're just like, bro, they're up 3-0 on you. Like, what evidence do you want to see? But I also understand because he's just like, if we can do a couple of things, we got this. But I'm also, I think, on the inverse side of that, if I'm Dallas, I look at last night's game and I'm like, y'all jokers damn near threw the game away at the end with that crazy 4-point play that Luka got. You still can't be trusted with nice things. And it took our guy, Kyrie Irving, who's one of the great closers of the last decade and a half in the NBA, to go 6 for 18 and 1 of 6 from 3 in a closeout game, which he's literally never done before. And by the way, they were still only -2 with Kyrie on the floor. Yeah. He was playing that poorly, and they were still -2 in the 42 minutes that Kyrie was on the floor. Crazily enough, Luka's -13 in his 41 minutes. So the Mavs on the scoreboard actually played better in the Kyrie no Luka minutes than the Luka no Kyrie minutes, despite the fact that Luka has 28 points, 15 rebounds, and 10 assists by the end of it. And Kyrie's got 16 points, 4 assists, and 4 turnovers. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not that scared if I'm Dallas. I obviously want to close this thing out ASAP. I don't want to let this young Timberwolves team find confidence because they are dangerous. Like, if Karl Anthony Towns remembered how to shoot, like, this is going to be an interesting series. And he is extremely talented. But it took him going 9 of 13, right? It's not like he went 7 of 13 and like 3 of 5 from 3, and you're like, okay, well, this is like sustainable. He still fouled out of the game, had 5 fouls most of the fourth quarter, was dodging that, only had 5 rebounds, and he shot so lights out that it feels unsustainable, and they won by 5. So I realize that some of my analysis here is colored by the fact that I think the Mavericks are better, and I trust them way more. I don't trust the Timberwolves. I don't particularly like some of the dudes on the T-Wolves and like the way they go about it. We've talked about that quite a bit. The lack of trust I have, not like personally, but just basketball-wise. Like, you're just like, meh, I don't know. I don't think I can trust you. And so I realize that some of this might be me searching for confirmation bias, but it literally took a, not all-timer, but like a statistical outlier of a performance from Towns, 9 for 13, 4 or 5 from 3, to win by 5 in a game where Kyrie was not good, where Luka, despite the total numbers, was percentage-wise not good. He was not efficient. If I'm Dallas, I'm like, all right, let's run this back. Kyrie's going to be better. Luka's going to be better. Y'all dudes are going to be worse, and we're going to win.
I just feel like on the reverse side of that argument, though, if you look at the first 3 games, if Dallas is only winning by, 2-3 points, and Karl Anthony Towns is having this poor of a start to a series, then maybe, the Timberwolves will be up 3-1 as opposed to down 3-1. I think also the thing that you pointed out in terms of this game coming down to a matter of points is the coaching. I think, and not to say, Finch and them did an amazing job. I think game to game, that's when they make their adjustments. But I would prefer to see them make, in-game adjustments. And I think some of the players, they're the ones, like, on the court, they're the ones that's out there seeing everything. So I will credit Slow-Mo. I don't think he gets too much of the credit because of the box score. But the things that he did yesterday that weren't in the box scores, such as the back screens that frees up Karl Anthony Towns, that frees up Walker Alexander, those don't show up in the box score, but necessarily more so their impact plays. And they help, dictate, the flow of the game and allow Anthony to, be a playmaker, facilitate more. And he had 9 assists in the second half. He started to trust his teammates, and that's also because of Slow-Mo.
Yeah, for sure. But then again, playoff series often come down to what, Anthony? What's my go-to? Like, when all else fails, what's the piece of analysis that wins out?
Experience.
Not experience. Who's the best player in the series?
Best player in the series.
Who was the best player in games 1 through 3 in the series?
Luka or Kyrie.
Yeah, Luka, I would say probably over Kyrie.
Yeah.
But they were probably 1-2, right? Maybe there's one game in there where Anthony Edwards is second. But like, who was the best player on the floor last night?
AE.
Yeah. Like, sometimes all this other stuff, because those guys have such a gravitational pull on everybody else that, like, if those guys play well, part of it is going to show in their assist numbers, et cetera, because other guys are knocking down shots. But you just watch the game. Who's the best player last night? Anthony Edwards. Like, okay, they won. And are there exceptions to that rule? Sometimes. Game 1 of the 2017 finals. LeBron James is maybe the best NBA Finals game in the history of the finals. It's like 50 points, 17 rebounds, whatever it was. And then J.R. Smith lost his ever-loving mind. LeBron punched a whiteboard afterwards, and the Warriors won in 4 or 5 games. And they won that game. But, like, it took that Warriors group with Durant and everybody healthy to overcome that level of greatness in the playoffs. So I think ultimately, if Luka gets more to a Luka-esque place, I think at this point in their careers, he's a better player than Anthony Edwards. And what I think is terrifying for the future is Anthony Edwards is still 22 years old. So this is not to say that like Luka will be that forever, but it does feel like there's an opportunity right now for Luka to be like, I am the best player, not only left in the playoffs, but maybe in the league, to put his real stamp on that. And, you know, he'll get to test that against Tatum and everybody in the finals, assuming they win one of the next few. But I would say I'm not terribly scared of if I'm Dallas. Like my message is we're fine. Play like we have been. Hit some more shots. We're good. Not hey, they did something that we need to be scared of. Just make your adjustments and go on. If I'm Minnesota, I'm saying like hey, they gave us a shot. We gotta continue to be the aggressor. Like that's my message if I'm Chris Finch. A fun offshoot conversation, though, of this is what's it going to take for an NBA team to come back from down 3-0? I was hearing this conversation, or I heard this conversation on a podcast I was listening to earlier today. I think it's a fun one. And could this Minnesota team do it? You can chime in at 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Don't forget, WNBA Commissioner Cathy Englebert joins us coming up at 4:45. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. 25 minutes from now, Cathy Englebert, the commissioner of the WNBA, joins us here on the Hoffman Show. Anthony, I was listening to the Low Post, Zach Lowe's pod, as I often do this time of year with NBA playoff basketball going. And he and Chris Herring of ESPN.com posed an interesting question to each other, which is basically like, Can the Wolves be a team that comes back from 3-0, but like what would it take, right? And they started naming some recent examples of some teams that have gotten close. Obviously, last year we saw the Celtics get real close, a 1 seed versus an 8 seed as they were facing the Miami Heat. Jason Tatum sprains his ankle early in that game, has a terrible Game 7, and down go the C's with Miami. Zach said, he's like, if I know one thing for sure, the team that's going to do it, which this would be in favor of the Wolves potentially being this team, not that he's predicting it, but one factor for him was, he's like, that team's going to have home court advantage. Like, if you are down 3-0, by nature, you're winning game 4 to have a chance. And then if you can go back home for game 5, and then you only have to win one road game, and then you're back home for game 7 with all the momentum, that's going to help you. To me, though, if you want to point... So, like, I agree with that. I think that's obviously a much, much easier path, right? If you have to win 2 of the final 3 on the road, very difficult. You win 2 of the final 3 at home, much easier. But to me, there's another factor that actually, if I'm the Wolves, I think this is a type of thing that can change a series. Which is, what's the biggest thing that can change a series in terms of the complexity of it? An injury. Very simply, if the players on the floor change, that's going to be the thing that changes the series more than anything else. There's no schematic change that can happen. There's no whatever. Then if the players on the floor change, and the most dramatic version of that is not going to be some guy comes in off the bench and upends an entire series. It's going to be a star player either exiting or entering the series. And while none of the stars have, to this point, exited this series, thankfully, and they were all healthy coming in, one no doubt factor that for a series that is this close, this series could be hanging on the balance of Derek Lively. And so I wonder, Anthony, like, if Lively comes back in game 6 or game 5, then are the Mavs just like, all right, we're good. And is that actually enough? But to me, when this eventually happens, when this eventually goes down, it's either going to be a situation where a star player misses the first couple of games. And I would say it's probably going to be the first 2. They come back in game 3, they're getting their feet underneath them. They lose a tough one. But then games 4, 5, 6, and 7, they just dominate. And they come back. Or, obviously, the worst, not that anyone getting injured in any order is good, but if, God forbid, a star player goes down in game 3 where a team is up 3-0 and they hold on to win game 3 and then he's unavailable for 4, 5, 6, and 7, well, that's the easiest way to change a series completely on its head. And I certainly don't think that's what we're staring at with Derek Lively or any of the other pieces that have been in and out of this Minnesota series. If everyone stays healthy, I still think the Mavs have enough to make it 156-0 versus the 155-0 that it is right now in NBA history.
I think momentum is a huge thing in these playoffs at this stage anyway. I mean, we've seen it, most famously with the Cavs coming back on the Warriors after they were down 3-1. Granted, Draymond Green only missed one game, but guess what? That one game was enough to carry the Cavs' momentum in their favor. So even if Lively does come back for game 5, like, some momentum has been shifted towards Minnesota. And we just talked about having home court advantage. They're going back. They're going home in a place they've, had a lot of success in. And I just think that sort of kind of favors them just because they found a way to, get one. Now that they've gotten one, they got some confidence. Now that they think they can go get 2. Jaden McDaniels talking about it in the post game. We got one. Let's go get another. And I think the way they've been processing it is more so just taking it one game at a time. And I think they can definitely get game 5. I think Derek Lively, though, if he does play it, it is a different series. I think, because Dwight Powell and Kleber, they don't have the same energy. They don't have the same rim protection. They don't have the same lob threat ability that Gafford and Lively possess. So I think it just changes drastically.
No doubt. It's very clear that the number one thing you can pair with Luka for a big is not a pick and pop big.
Yeah.
Because Kristaps Porzingis is about as good at that as anyone in the league.
Mm-hmm.
And they hit a pretty low ceiling, relatively speaking, to their talent a couple of years ago. Like Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, all due respect, are not better players than Kristaps Porzingis in a vacuum. Like if you're starting a team, if you redraft the whole league, those guys are not getting taken before Kristaps Porzingis, unless you've already got Luka Doncic on your team. And that's the thing, is like it's about the sum of the parts. And so I think that, why I think that when this eventually does happen, it'll be a bigger piece than Lively. But part of the very small margins of this series last night are Lively's not there. And Kleber is finding himself after being hurt. And he's still not, locked into the best of his abilities. And the best of his abilities are not as good as Derek Lively. So I do think that, especially, we'll see if he can come back for Game 5, but certainly if he can get back for Game 6 at home. Not that the Mavs should try to put all their eggs in that basket, because like you said, the momentum thing is scary. All of a sudden they win 2, that chatter gets a little bit louder. And if I'm Minnesota, I'm like, we don't have to win 4 games. We just have to not lose tonight.
Yep.
And you get to the next one. Worry about the next one tomorrow. Don't lose tonight. And for the Mavs, you can't be thinking about, we got to win one of the next 3. Yeah. That's a good way to drop at least 2 of them, if not all 3 of them.
Yep.
But it's going to be interesting. What % chance do you give Minnesota to come back in this series? Like, how many times, if I tell you they play this series 100 times from this point forward, does Minnesota win any of them?
Yeah.
How many? Because that's your percent. Because that's what 100 means. Percent.
I would say they win 97% of the time. I think out of 100 they will win it 3 times.
Yeah, I would go like 2.
Okay, yeah.
And by the way, if the teams were reversed, I'd probably give the Mavs like 3. Because that's what I think. I think these 2 teams are really equal. That's why I picked Mavs in 7.
No Lively.
The number's still 3 or 4.
And they're facing a 3-1 deficit.
Yeah. Having already, by the way, faced an 0-3 deficit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll probably still stay at 2-3.
Yeah. I mean, the chances they win 4 in a row against Luka Doncic at this stage in Luka's career, at pretty much what we think is going to be the peak of his powers.
Yeah.
Like, you just find ways to win when you're that good. And I think might they get the next one? Maybe. But I could also see a situation. I mean, how many times have Minnesota lost at home already?
This postseason?
Yeah.
I know they lost.
They lost 2 to Denver.
Yeah, 2 to Denver.
They lost 2 to Dallas already in the series. Maybe they over-relax at home.
Oh, man.
Is being, backs against the wall a chance to actually have some urgency maybe at home? Yeah. Oh, we'll see. Game 5 is tomorrow night. Again, the commissioner of the WNBA joins us at 4:45. Well, let's have Clinton Yates today. It is actually my Friday. I'm out the next couple of days. But that's not why we're having Clinton, even though Clinton does join us typically on Fridays. But huge story you may have heard about, that Major League Baseball is integrating Negro League stats into their record book. And thus, baseball history has been more accurately depicted as of today. Clinton, all over it, wrote a great piece for ESPN.com and Anscape. So you will be able to hear Clinton's take on this if you haven't read it yet. And I'll inquire on some things that were in his piece coming up at 5 o'clock. Again, Cathy Englebert at 4:45. And coming up next, a major story out of the golf world. Actually, a couple of stories out of the golf world. Varying levels of sad and tragic. But it is a reflection of a larger trend in sports. We're going to talk a little bit about the mental health of athletes and why a LPGA star retiring should be a warning shot across the sports universe to us all. That is next here on the Team 980. Just under 15 minutes till the commish joins us. WNBA Commissioner Cathy Englebert at 4:45. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And they're just looking at some of the top stories in sports over the weekend. There's obviously the tremendously tragic situation in the PGA Tour. Where a golfer, just 30 years old, died by suicide, according to his parents. And obviously, there's a mental health, backstory to that, and it's just tremendously sad. And that is the most severe outcome, obviously. But on a less severe but equally serious note, we hear earlier in the week that Lexi Thompson, 29 years old, one of the best PGA or LPGA golfers in the world over the last 15 years or so, which you're going, wait, 15 years? Didn't you say she's 29? Yeah, she turned pro at the age of 12. I was talking to CK before the show, our boss, and he was like, yeah, by the way, she was in studio with the Junkies 10 years ago. And she was just 19. Like, she's been on the scene for that long. And I guess they were in town for a tournament, and she came in as one of the burgeoning stars. And she's won double-digit tournaments. She's won a major, and she hasn't played particularly well the past couple of years. And she cited as part of her reason that she is going to step away that her mental health has not been in a great space. In 2019, she actually stepped away from the tour for a bit. She came back and won a couple of tournaments, but those were her last wins on tour. And I just think that what we're seeing, Anthony, across not just sports, but across society is a much higher awareness of people's mental health. Where in the past, if you were depressed, like you just kind of had to deal with it. We didn't have the language to describe what depression really is or what anxiety is or the disorders that can be around, whether it's anxiety or other facets of mental health. We didn't have the language or the resources to talk about these things, nevertheless address them as a society. Certainly there were professionals, and I think why I appreciate someone like Lexi Thompson so much is speaking about it gives a permission structure for other people to talk about it. And I'm sure that there are people listening right now who are of a certain age. I don't know exactly where the line is, but let's say in their late 40s, in their 50s or 60s or 70s even, that are like, you kids, well, back in my day, we just sucked it up. Well, people that are my age, mid-30s, your age, certainly Anthony, late 20s or younger, are listening like, yeah, this is just what we do. Like, we talk about our mental health because it's important. And at the end of the day, like, health is health. Just because you can't see, someone doesn't wear a cast on their arm, or like they do on their arm, doesn't mean there's something not going wrong in the brain. There are legitimately, like, the chemicals in your brain, if you have certain mental health issues, are not interacting in the way that they're supposed to. And that can just be from a hormonal level or any of the other things that go on that can ultimately be addressed, if they're chemical, by a psychiatrist with medicine to balance those things. But the reason I want to talk about this is not just because, or the reason I think it's important, and the reason I actually, the like angle that I want to talk about this at is actually more self-examination, not like micro. I want to talk about me. I want to talk about us, the collective media. And it's something where, like, obviously, I think one thing that's cool is, like, most teams now have sports psychologists that can work with players. And so there are more resources available. If you're someone like Lexi Thompson, I would sure the LPGA has resources available, but also, like, she's made enough money that she puts together her team that includes her coach and her strength and conditioning coach. There's probably also, like, a mental health professional. One of the best examples in recent years of that, of an individual sport athlete conquering that with the help of a mental health professional, is Aryna Sabalenka, the number 2 tennis player in the world. She had a lot of, like, crippling anxiety and was not very good at dealing with stress. And this was highlighted on the Netflix show Breakpoint, that she hired a sports psychologist and started working with that person. And what happened was, not only was she a, like, happier, healthier, better person, better to be around, better to herself, better than that, her results got better. She broke through the ceiling that had been placed on her career because she had performance anxiety on the court and stressors off the court that impacted her performance. And what I hope to happen here, and I think about this in someone like Lexi Thompson's case, is how do we as a media, and I'll point the finger at us first before talking about some other entities. How do we as a media still do our jobs, which ultimately is to tell the stories of the athlete, which involves finding out information, which involves getting to know them, which involves asking questions, which is by nature on some level intrusive, even if it's done in a press conference setting or in a one-on-one interview put together by a public relations staffer that the athlete signs off on. You want to be real with these people and get real information and tell their stories. Not just, of course, there are people that are out there to do gotcha, whatever, and that are trying to be prying and intrusive, but even just to do it in a positive way, there is a give and take that has to happen. And I wonder how we can do that better. And one of the things that I think about, Ant, is like the locker room, right? We go in the post-game locker room after NFL games. These guys have just done the, gridiron battle for 3.5 hours. They're exhausted. They're hopped up on adrenaline and testosterone because they have to perform at their best. And then 15 minutes after the game, we're like, tell us what you saw on 3rd and 6 in the second quarter. And we need to capture that because that's part of the environment that makes the game. And I know some fans are like, no, you don't. It's like, yeah, the radio show that you're listening to right now, the newspaper article that's now probably online, that you read, the podcast that you listen to, the information about the game that you consume beyond 1 to 4 on Sunday relies on us asking those questions. So there's got to be a way to do it. But I just wonder, and I'm not about to stop talking and toss it to you, Ant, like you have magically the answers just sitting in your back pocket. But I wonder how we can do that stuff better. That's where I look at a story like the Lexi Thompson story and some of the others that we've seen where athletes have retired early and cited mental health as a reason why, and go, how do we make the environment that these athletes exist in better?
Do you think, because I'm thinking about young actors and actresses.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about singers, rappers, and a lot of what they also have to deal with, and how this all sort of kind of it's basically, to me, it comes down to pressure and just sometimes just feeling overwhelmed.
100%. And I think that that's one thing that I struggle with, to be completely honest sometimes, is and why I talk about college athletes differently than I do pros is because these are young people. I asked Kristen Lapis about this, last week? 17 years ago last week, when we had Kristen Lapis, the film director, on, who just did the documentary on Caitlin Clark, and Camila Cardoza and Kiki Rice. And I was like, do you almost feel like a parent protective nature because these are young people? And she's like, yeah, I have to do the journalism and I have to try to convince them that the best thing for them is doing the journalism and doing this in a fair way that accurately represents what happens and shows them in a human way. But I also don't want to feel like I'm overexposing them because, scientifically speaking, you're not equipped to deal with that stuff when you're 22 years old. Your brain chemicals, talking about brain chemicals, forget having something that's disordered. When you're 20 years old, your chemicals are not in the proper balance yet. That's just science. And so I think that when we talk about athletes, so many of them are so young, and making sure that we are both doing the things we need to do and treating them like adults because they are, but also being human about it is something that we collectively as a media can try to do better. But also, I think that there's probably a much larger conversation to have about social media as well. And that, by the way, also goes to youth athletes. I'm sure that's a conversation we can have at some point this summer about how parents feel about this with their kids playing youth sports. When we get back, though, we will talk to the WNBA's commissioner, Cathy Englebert, in 3 minutes on The Hoffman Show. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app, and we are streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980 as well. It is our pleasure now to welcome to the show the commissioner of the WNBA. It is Cathy Englebert. Cathy, Craig Hoffman here. Thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
It's great to be here in the DMV, so it's great to be here for a game tonight.
Absolutely. I was going to ask, I know you're over at ESA and you're in town. What actually brings you to DC? I know you travel, of course, all over the league, but what brings you here now?
Yeah, so Mystics play tonight against the Atlanta Dream at 7 p.m. over at ESA here, and we've had a great day of meeting with Mystics fans and corporate partners, et cetera. So yeah, it's my yearly trip here.
Nice and easy trip down from New York. Of course, there's so much happening in the league, and you guys recently announced that you have two expansion teams coming to the league in Toronto and the Bay Area. The player pool has seemingly been ready for this for a long time. There's been so much talent that hasn't been able to even penetrate the league. But I know there's so much more that goes into expansion than just, hey, we have a bunch of talented players that need jobs. So what are the things that are in place now that allowed for you to make those moves that weren't there before?
Yeah, well, Craig, coming off of raising capital in February of 22, coming out of the pandemic strong, coming from what I call survive to thrive, it was time to expand. We need to be in more markets as the longest tenured women's professional sports team in the country. So adding the Bay Area, hugely accretive, now adding Toronto and essentially a whole country, the country of Canada, hugely accretive as we get into our next media rights negotiation. That's going to be helpful because the more markets you're in, the more fans you build, and the fandom is loyal to your city and loyal to your team. So that's what's happened, and I'm so excited. And we've announced that we have two more coming, and so we'll get up to 16 teams, which I think will be great. It'll give 48 additional roster spots in a league of 144 today. That's pretty good, a 33% increase, more jobs to players, and also the economies in these cities that will impact during the summer months. Whether it's arena workers or workers for the team and things like that, it's going to be great for expansion and for the growth of the league.
I think a lot of us observing, especially those of us that are also huge NWSL fans, I actually used to work for the Spirit here in DC. We watched that league able to expand at a little bit faster rate and wonder, like, we knew the W would expand eventually. And I'm just I'm asking this, Cathy, not as a place from a place of doubt, but a place of genuine curiosity. What are the main differences between your two leagues that were both trying to grow at the same time that allowed them to expand a little bit faster, whereas the economic situation for you was different and this is the right timeline for your league?
Yeah, it's just a strategy and a philosophical view. We needed to get more of our business transformation done. So my philosophy was, let's get the business transformation done and then expand. Others might say expand and keep your fingers crossed that the business is going to transform. And we were right. We had 24 million people at peak watch that NCAA final, a basketball game. Everyone's talking about women's basketball. Now we're seeing historic numbers in the WNBA for viewership. We outrated the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs on the opening night, and we were on ESPN too. They were on ESPN. So, I think we made the right decision in getting our financial situation in the right place. We're now able to afford charter flights for our players. We're able to give the players a better experience. And so couldn't be prouder of how we did this, following the strategy, coming off tough couple years of the pandemic and raising that capital, deploying that against marketing and a digital transformation. We're making it easier to be a fan. And that's all really aligning nicely as we get into our next round of media rights negotiations.
WNBA Commissioner Cathy Englebert with us here on the Hoffman Show. I want to ask you about those media negotiation rights in a second, but you mentioned the charter flights, and I feel like I have to ask this question, Cathy, because so many fans got involved in that discussion, and we're wondering, like, kind of the fan version of the question is like, hey, what took so long? But I'm on a more genuine way, like, what were the things that ultimately drove that decision to happen with the timing that it did, where now is the right time, but it also wasn't ready for the regular season?
Yeah, this is a bold decision by us as we got new information about the momentum, the next round of media negotiations. This is also an Olympic year. It's a very tough footprint for our players to play so many games per week in an Olympic year where we have to break for the Olympics, but we still play 40 games. We still have an all-star game. We have a Commissioner Cup championship coming up. So it's all related to this is the right time. We finally feel good that we're not going to jeopardize the financial viability of the league. This is very expensive. It's a bold decision, but I finally felt we were in the right place. It took us 1 week to get it up and running fully for the regular season as of last Tuesday. So 1 week, and we're just excited to give the players that benefit in advance of any future collective bargaining agreement, because now we feel the economic model has been built enough. And it really is in the last month or two that we felt comfortable as we looked out at our financial position, and that we feel like this would be something we could do for the long term, Craig, because it's also not a decision you make for 1 year.
Sure.
You're really making it for decades when you do it. And you're hoping that your revenue build and the growth in our revenue, we've got corporate partners stepping up, our WNBA change makers like AT&T and Nike and Deloitte and CarMax and Google and U.S. Bank. So as you feel comfortable, and as we got so many calls after our draft, our historic viewership on draft, that was kind of the turning point for me, that I felt like we could sustain this, we could sustain the momentum, and therefore we could make this jump and leap financially into affording charter. It's very expensive.
Oh, I would imagine.
But now I feel very confident that we have an economic model and a revenue model that will fund it for the long term. That's what we did not have last year or the year before or the year before. Look, this is something I wanted for the players since I came into the league, but I'm also a business person with 33 years of business experience before I came in here. You've got to build a long-term revenue model to fund it. It's an operating expense, and it's not something you can just do for 1 or 2 years and then you'd be out of business. So I feel confident now that in the future of the league and all the investment and capital inflows into women's sports and into the WNBA, all the interest we're now getting in other cities wanting an expansion team, that's a good sign. That's a competitive sign. All the interest in media companies in the WNBA and carrying our great live products. So those were all the factors that led into it.
I guess my follow-up question, Cathy, would be then, at what point can you start to anticipate? Because I think if you look at the popularity going back to the 23 Final Four, and how much Caitlin and Angel in that game blew up the sport, and the increased numbers that you guys saw in the W last year with ratings and revenue and the whole deal, and anticipating then that rookie class coming in, I think it would be logical to ask, like, okay, at some point you could see this was coming, and that some of this financial viability and some of the need for this was going to be coming. And so something like the charter flights, it took a week, but if you start 3 weeks sooner, then it's ready by the regular season. I'm oversimplifying this because I do not have the 33 years of business experience that you do. I host a talk radio show, but those are the pieces I'm looking at. Can you help me and the audience understand kind of that risk tolerance and the levels here of when you can start to safely anticipate and make some moves ahead of time versus waiting to be financially viable in the way that you are now?
Yeah, I think I told you the new information was coming off draft, a historic viewership number. We had over 3 million people at peak watch our draft. We had never had over 1 million. That was a huge positive sign. That wasn't until April 15th. So as you think about then, as we're starting to negotiate our media rights, starting to think about how that will play out, that's really the thing that funds it in men's sports, by the way, is the billions and billions of dollars of media rights that get paid to the NFL and other leagues. So as you get new information related to that, but look, we've been working on this for years. In fact, we already were going to fund a $4 million fund this year for charter, because we had more back-to-backs because of the Olympic break requiring air travel, as well as our full playoffs. And so we've been chipping away at this, Craig, every year. So chip away. And finally this year, we thought we could expand it to a greater amount at the start of the season. So, and again, the Olympic, I can't stress enough, when you have to break in a 4.5-month season for 23 days for the Olympics, that's a big deal too. So that's kind of, it was kind of the confluence of all these factors coming together at the same time, off of the Final Four, which obviously wasn't until early April, our draft, then our training camp, which was reduced this year. So it was all factoring into that, and then the start of thinking through the future of our media rights and our corporate partners stepping up in a bigger way, even since draft and since, coming off the Final Four as well. So, and just to comment on, you need 3 things in sports. You need household names, rivalries, and games of consequence. And March Madness had all of that. It had it last year. That's where rivalry. But we were already building rivalries and super teams through our very active free agency coming off our last collective bargaining agreement. So that was already all happening here. And I think these players who are under NIL, name, image, likeness contracts in college are now getting more opportunities. They're coming in with big brands. So I think that's going to sustain the momentum. The other thing I was looking at was the future rookie classes. I mean, literally bringing in Juju Watkins in a couple years from USC, bringing in Kiki Rice from UCLA, Hannah Hidalgo from Notre Dame, Paige Beckers from UConn. So it wasn't just about this rookie class that weighed in and is going to weigh into the economics of this league. I feel so blessed to be in women's basketball because it's the next 4 years and probably beyond that we're going to have this generational talent with big brands coming into the league.
Two more questions for Commissioner Cathy Englebert of the WNBA here on the Hoffman Show. We'll wrap in a moment, Cathy, with those media rights and kind of where we stand. Adam Silver's had some recent comments. I know you've been talking about them as well. But you actually just brought up something that I wanted to ask you about as well. In conjunction with expansion and with all this talent that is coming into the league, do you think that there's a chance that you will revisit the age limit where a player like DC's own Kiki Rice probably could play and be all right in the league coming out after her freshman or sophomore year. But currently the way the age limit works, you have to wait a little bit longer. And I totally respect that if you're the WNBA PA with such limited job opportunities for the players. As you mentioned, the league right now at 144. You mentioned earlier how many jobs are coming with the 2 and then 2 more, ultimately 4 expansion teams. Do you think that's an area that could get revisited as some of these college stars are maybe a little bit more ready to come into the WNBA at younger ages?
I am sure that is something we'll be talking about in the next round of collective bargaining, which will be, probably this time next year that would start. But I don't have the answer to that today. I'm sure that'll be something we all need to consider. I did, like when I came into the league, I did ask the question, why is that? And if the average tenure of a WNBA player is 4.5, 5 years, most professional athletes, it is like that. You want to make sure that they have a path post their playing career to do something for the next 30, 40 years of their life. So to the extent they can have more opportunities, whether it's in college or in the W, to, build some wealth, and then what they do after, it was nice that they have a college, degree and things like that to do something post their playing career, because not everybody's going to play for the number of years that a Sue Bird or Diana Taurasi has played for. So but I'm sure it'll be a topic of conversation going forward.
Yeah, I still would like to just know what Sue ate and what Diana is still eating for breakfast, but that's I can do that investigative journalism another time. Last but not least, you mentioned this a number of times in our chat here. You are, along with the NBA, undergoing these media rights negotiations. Adam Silver was quoted, I think it was about a month ago, amongst other places that I'm sure he's talked about it, that there will be at least some WNBA rights that are in this NBA media rights deal. What can you tell us about the intertwining of those two and where we stand with the next iteration of WNBA coverage?
Yeah, I think we have a great opportunity, and what I call it's going to market together, because with the NBA, the WNBA adds to programming across over 330 days or so across the year. And if you think about how much the media model has shifted to streaming platforms and subscription models, so even the traditional media companies have their streaming subscriptions, like a Peacock, like a ESPN Plus, Disney Plus, et cetera, Max. And then you look at now the new media companies, let's call them, a lot of the technology companies like an Amazon, Apple, Netflix, who are also on subscription models. So I think there's a huge advantage from that perspective to going to market. Because we play kind of in opposite seasons, can provide over, basically 12 months of live programming across those dimensions. We're probably one of the few leagues that can couple together and do that. So there'll be a tranche that is go to market with the NBA, and then a tranche of W-only deals, just like we have today, because we have, Scripps Ion today, as well as CBS and Amazon that the NBA doesn't have, and the NBA has WBD that we don't have. So I think we'll have a hybrid going forward, and we'll use the best of both worlds, and it's hugely advantageous. And I admire, everything the NBA has done in building out their global platform and things like that. So going to market with them is an advantage on part of this, and then we'll have additional opportunities for games, especially with expansion. We'll have more games because we're adding teams, more games for national platforms and media companies to pick up. So I'm really excited and looking forward to the next phase here.
How hard is it to negotiate in this media environment? Because I know for me, people will say, oh, what do you want to do in 10 years? I'm like, I don't know. Do you think I know what the media environment is going to be in 10 years? I hope to be working for somewhere talking into a microphone. I don't know where that gets broadcast or put on the internet or wherever, because it's changing so much. So as you and Adam and your teams negotiate this, how hard is it to try to look ahead when we don't really know where the media is going?
Yeah, I think one of the nice things about being in live sports and having live sports as your product, and when you're the best basketball in the world, like the NBA is and the WNBA, you're a sought after, platform. And so I think, again, the more national we get, the more global we get. That's why bringing Canada in was important. And hopefully we can do the global games like the NBA has done in the future. I think, again, live sports is really keeping a lot of that programming alive on a lot of these networks. So I think we're in a really good position. So I see all the disruption. We've monitored it, but I still think live sports is such a valuable asset to these media companies going forward. So we're excited to get into it.
No doubt about it. Cathy Englebert, Commissioner of the WNBA. Enjoy the game tonight. Enjoy DC, and hopefully we'll have you on the show again down the road.
Thank you, Craig. Really appreciate the support. Take care.
Absolutely. That's Cathy Englebert with us here, the commissioner of the WNBA here on The Hoffman Show. We will react to some of what she said later on in the show. But up next, 5 o'clock, Not My Beat, Clinton Yates joins us for a special visit and a rewriting of Major League Baseball's record books. It's the Hoffman Show here on the Team 980. Always live as well in the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. Our thanks again to WNBA Commissioner Cathy Englebert, who just joined us. If you missed the interview, you can rewind in the Odyssey app. Check it out on our podcast feed or on our YouTube page in just a little bit at the Team 980 or at Hoffman W Sports. All our women's sports content in one place at Hoffman W Sports on YouTube. Right now, though, it is 5 o'clock. Actually, it's about 5:07 already. Commish and I ran a little long. So it is time for Not My Beat, which today brings in a show regular for a very specific purpose.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not My Beat.
Our guest today, well, he's been on a lot, normally on Fridays, but never for Not My Beat, Clint Yates. Today, you, sir, you get to tackle the top story. You wrote, this is like real newsworthiness. I'm not just having you on because we're friends. This is great.
This is like when you go into somebody else's like homeroom who you normally hang out with like after school and playing sports. It's like, no, I'm showing up to your homeroom today. How about that? I've got the announcements. That's me.
Right. We would like to tell all the class today that there's been a monumental shift in the way that baseball's history is being presented. Negro League stats are now in the official record book for combined with Major League Baseball, and thus there are new leaders in a number of categories. Many of those categories now led by Josh Gibson. And this has been an ongoing project for a long time. But Clinton, I guess I'll start here. You mentioned in the piece that you wrote for Anscape, which folks can find at anscape.com or linked on ESPN.com's homepage. But you mentioned that there's a group of statisticians that have been working on a particular project since the year 2000. However, when does that work and the other work that goes into doing something like this intersect with a desire from Major League Baseball and whoever else is at play here to actually make these stats all together and be like, in the history of baseball, for instance, Josh Gibson is now the leader in OPS.
Yeah. The year was 2020, the same year that a lot of things happened. Reminders of all the things that happened, not just in America, but in the sports world in 2020. Same year that NASCAR brought down the Confederate flag. Same year, well, soon thereafter, that the football team had to do something about it in terms of their name. 2020 was a year that I believe really forced a lot of different entities in America to take a look at what their relationship was with black folks. And it was no different for Major League Baseball. They announced in 2020, and at the time, I wrote and I said, elevation is not the word here for what the Negro Leagues are in terms of what the Major Leagues are comparatively. I was upset with the framing in that situation of, oh, we're going to include you. Oh, nobody should have looked down upon this beforehand. Well, the only reason they looked down upon it beforehand was because Major League Baseball were the ones doing the discriminating. So that felt a little disingenuous. However, at the same time, I understood the need for some level of official recognition. Bob Kendrick, my dear friend, president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri, my mama's hometown, is a historian, is a showman, is a presenter of all information and a curator in a way that is unparalleled. However, there was always that one little bit where it was like, if we're not going to actually count this, what are we really doing aside from telling old ghost stories, for lack of a better term? And this, I think, we can talk the specific process of it later. 2020 to now is really when I think things sort of kickstart and be like, yo, we got to do something. Otherwise, we're just dragging along, looking like the same old as dirt old as dirt league that we are in America.
So baseball is a sport that is more obsessed with statistics, and the statistics and the records mean more than, I would argue, any other sport. So the significance of this to you in baseball specifically is what?
It's not entirely statistical, I'll be honest, because that mindset that baseball stats are the only things that matter is true, but it is also, Craig, rooted in a very specific part of the fan base for many years that have sort of evolved and changed. Part of the reason why people were so obsessed with stats is because the game was so old. You couldn't see anything. You had no other access point to any of the stories other than the stats. Over the years, they became discussion points as ways for people to try to identify who the legends are. It's very much still a big deal when it comes to Hall of Fame voting. That's sort of another story. But over the years, people have looked at the stats as the only numbers that they can remember because they're so old and they mean so much to all of our minds. 715 comes to mind in terms of what Hank Aaron got to break Babe Ruth's home run record. And things like that are burned into your brain as far as the experience goes. This, however, is an advancement for a couple different reasons. Is it cool to be able to say, yeah, Josh Gibson was that good? You can legitimately compare him. If you read about this 100 years from now, yes, but I won't be around then, and neither will you. What's important to me about this now is the path we took to get there. Guys have been researching this literally for 25 years. That doesn't just mean going to the internet to find it on Wikipedia. They do not have game logs for these things. They have found an incredible amount of statistical information through actual human research that on top of that, Gregory, had to be manually data entered. We're not just scanning glossies here, buddy. We're actually putting these things into a database in order to be able to compare them. And thirdly, they had to come up with a system mathematically to be able to qualify what makes sense because the Negro League seasons were so much shorter. They did the work on this. If you look at the body of work, it is impressive from a process standpoint, well beyond the conclusions they reached. That's the thing that's most impressive to me beyond the members of the panel who are all people that for the most part I trust.
Yeah, for sure. And you have a great quote at the top of your piece. Records and stories and stats are not all the same thing. That's from John Thorne, an MLB historian that I think captures that really well, which is probably why you put it at the top of your piece. Clinton Yates, Anscape, of course, ESPN commentator with us here on the Hoffman Show. So let's get into that a little bit. And one thing that I love that you addressed in your piece is it's not the Negro League, it's the Negro Leagues. There was many different leagues of different levels. And so trying to decipher what goes into a stats, let's call it an ecosystem that is trying to capture the top level of baseball. Major League Baseball, obviously, is that. And then the question kind of becomes like, where in the Negro Leagues, like what games count, and both from a quality standpoint, but also from a record keeping standpoint, as you touched on already. But there's really fascinating anecdotes in your piece talking about, okay, we have a box score, but we can't verify it with a game story. And so that doesn't count. And so in a lot of ways, these stats are just incomplete because of time and the fact that this happened a long time ago. But what to you is important about kind of the level setting and the historical accuracy, that process that you're talking about in trying to put this together over the 25 years that this group has been studying this?
For me, if a kid learns about a Negro League player based on a stat that leads to a story, we've got a better discussion about the game and the country than we do whether or not he wants to argue if Ted Williams or Josh Gibson had a better OPS. Do you see what I'm saying here? Like, the processes they went through to find these things, trying to put together and piece together. It's like Indiana Jones. You know what I mean? Piece together various pieces of history in order to tell a story, to me, was so much more interesting than what they came up with. And to get into a little bit into what you were talking about, basically what they did was if they had a game story or a box score, they didn't count anything that could not be corroborated. So, for example, if it says, oh, Clinton Yates went 3 for 3 off Craig Hoffman and hit the ball 1,500 feet because Craig Hoffman is a terrible pitcher and everybody knows that Clinton Yates is a tremendous right-handed bat. If that's just something some guy said, then that's just whatever. But if it's in a box score, then you can actually corroborate it and you can say, okay, well, that's reasonable to believe. I did take that opportunity to take a shot at your pitching skills there, just being funny. But
you've never seen me throw a baseball, so that's fine.
I've not seen you
Which,
throw
by
a
the way,
baseball.
is a tragedy of our friendship. Next time I see you, we're playing catch.
Excellent point. But anyway, my point is that can you imagine what you would have to do and what you would learn if you had to figure out that much about everything and you couldn't just trust a number on a screen? The wealth of knowledge that is now available and out there as a result of that, to me, is far more important than anybody arguing at a barbershop is going to have over guys that are 100 years old dead or whatever, you know. And I don't say that to disrespect their families or their legacies. It's just we're at a different stage of this conversation now than just who was the greatest and where do the numbers lie. It's so much more complex than that, and that's a great reason why we do our jobs.
No doubt. And so kind of to that end, I ask this genuinely from like what we know about the Negro Leagues, and especially the top leagues with the best players, the Satchel Pages, the Josh Gibsons, on down the list. Like, if the best Negro League baseball team of the time faces the best Major League Baseball teams of the time, and whether you want to pick the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, whatever, like how close what happens in a 7-game series, just to understand the quality, because I think people like the way history has been presented, more than unfortunately, is that like obviously the major leagues were the best of the best, and it's like, well, if half the population or more is missing out of one league, who's to say that the league that was the white league that continued on and we still have the same 3 letters was actually the better one? And so what do we understand about the quality of Negro League baseball, especially at the highest level? And by the way, something that I also appreciated that you put in the piece is that some of these were like really well funded. Like we know these were great players, but they also had resources that I don't think were fully presented in a lot of the histories that we learned about baseball growing up.
I'm going to get into some touchy waters here, but I think you're going to understand what I'm saying. If we're going to use an equilibrium to gauge how you could measure those two things, you could gauge the interest of white people who were allowed to make the choice. And white folks were at Negro League games a lot. And that's kind of the easiest way to say this. It's like, if the people who had the choice to watch the best baseball often chose the Negro Leagues, well, that kind of answers your question. Whether
capitalism, baby.
I know. There it is. Whether or not that has to do with the competition levels and all this other stuff, who's to say? I'm not super, I'm confident that would have been fine as a theoretical concept. And quite frankly, on MLB The Show, you can play these games now, which is a whole other matter, but that's cool. But yeah, just look at the market, look at the market forces. That's just how that worked. And so that to me is also part of this discussion. We have to understand more than just the binary of white or black. There's a reason all of this stuff happened. And at Rickwood Field in about a month, that story is going to be told by Major League Baseball in a different way when they roll this out. Should be very interesting.
So what's next for all of this? Like, do the record books just get updated now? And it's like, oh, when I go search Major League Baseball records, like we see new names. Is there a larger presentation to make people more aware of this? And
yes.
What are some of the other things that are happening here?
They're doing a whole thing at Rickwood Field to release the data set and how to use it and how people are going to go to it. But the main thing that I sort of appreciated about this is that when I wrote in 2020, the word elevate is foul. That's a reason to apologize, not to say you're welcome. And on top of that, let's get some better verbiage as to what we're actually trying to achieve here. And they did as much. Again, they directly addressed the issue. These stats can be used alongside and or beside for comparative purposes, but there are also other leagues than the Negro Leagues that have their stats folded in to Major League Baseball stats. And it's a work in progress is the point. There's so much appreciation I have for the fact that they're saying this is a living thing that we are actively trying to continue to build in order to build out our map and our stories. It's not just slam it shut and say, look at that, Josh Gibson, the greatest of all time. That's not even the point of this. And while it is easy to be reductive and get too caught up in those weeds, that's not where I am at that. I'm smarter than that, and I care about baseball more than that, quite frankly. So yes, this is the beginning of something that frankly has been 25 years in the making. It's quite the day.
Yeah, no, for sure. And to wrap up, what's next is that we're not done. What are some of the stories that you have found over the years that you've been writing about this stuff, where you mentioned in the piece, like you got grandkids or great grandkids that open up some trunk in the attic and there's a treasure trove of newspaper articles and box scores. And it's like, oh, we got to add these to the stats. So now that we're looking at it through not just the storytelling, but the statistical lens and how those two things interact, like, what is the process of this continuing to be an ongoing project when, like, I don't think Lou Gehrig's stats are going to change or whatever else. Like, so, the fact that one league had its records well enough kept and written about in the newspapers that we have the record of, and the other, we might find some treasure trove of new information in someone's attic. Like, what does that mean for the ongoingness of this project besides what a kind of cool, amazing thing?
It means that my life as Tintin sports writer version continues as I scour the country looking for various treasures all over the globe. My friend Morgan is the one who really put me onto this. Her grandfather played and managed and coached, rather, for the Homestead Grays, which played between Pittsburgh and D.C. She said she went into her parents' attic one day and found this huge trunk full of stuff and was like, are you serious? These kinds of discoveries, never mind for the moment, but for the info, will continue to happen. And I will continue to document them as this is what I am paid to do. So I'm excited about it.
Well, party on, Clinton. Party on. Clinton Yates, you should definitely read this piece in Anscape. It is so good. There's so many different layers to it. So anscape.com or get to it through ESPN.com. I know you've done a million different shows today. Obviously, ESPN Daily, you guys are covering this where Clinton is the host, as folks who listen regularly know, daily. Anything else to point people towards?
No, I just want to say that this was such an interesting moment because last weekend in Cooperstown, they held something called the East-West Classic in conjunction with the Players Alliance, which is the group of former African-American players who are now funded by MLB and outside sources and partners to try to grow the game a little bit. And so you saw names like CeCe Sabathia, Curtis Granderson, recently retired MLB players playing at Doubleday Field in Cooperstown, where they also unveiled a statue of Henry Louis Aaron at the facility. And these are the kind of things that you got to keep building. You got to keep going because otherwise it will get forgotten as evidenced by what's right in front of our eyes right now.
No doubt. All right. Read it, ESPN.com and Anscape. Clinton, appreciate you. And I'm sure we'll continue to obviously talk about this if more treasure troves are uncovered. And if not, we'll be back to our usual shenanigans next week.
Gregory, I will take your fastball out of the yard any day of the week. Goodbye.
You gotta come back home first.
Wow,
to escape your nice, beautiful weather in Southern California. Goodbye, Clinton. Clinton Yates, everybody. And within the last 2 minutes of our conversation there, we have
breaking news. Oh, snap, news is broken. Breaking news.
The Washington Wizards have found their coach. They didn't look very far. The Wizards have hired Brian Keefe as their next head coach to replace Wes Unseld Jr. The interim coach for the back half of the season apparently did enough to earn the job. We will have full reaction starting at 5:30 right here on your home for Wizards basketball, the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And what a day we are having. The Washington Wizards have just announced that they have the 26th head coach in franchise history and will be the guy who was also number 25.5, if you will. They, of course, fired Wes Unseld Jr. in January, replaced him on an interim basis with Brian Keefe. And it is Brian Keefe who apparently will have the job moving forward. This was just announced about 10 minutes ago from the Wizards. Today was, I guess, the day. From general manager Will Dawkins, we are excited for Brian to become our next head coach. Brian is a proven motivator and connector of people. As a leader in the organization, he will continue to positively grow and invest in the development of our players. His wealth of experience will help move our team forward as we build for long-term success. Keefe released this statement as part of the announcement as well. I'm grateful to Michael Winger and Will, as in Dawkins, for the opportunity to lead the Washington Wizards. I look forward to continuing to work with our players and helping them grow and develop. As a team, we are committed to a collaborative approach to build an environment of accountability and hard work that allows us to improve every day. Keefe, of course, has a long career as an assistant. He has been with Brooklyn, Oklahoma City, Los Angeles, as in the Clippers, where he was working under Winger there, and he was also with the Knicks from 2014 and 2016. He's worked with a number of MVP caliber players, including Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. As an assistant coach, Keefe has been a part of teams that have earned playoff berths on 8 occasions in 16 years, including 5 consecutive with the Thunder from 2009 to 2014. That includes the 2012 NBA Finals. This is not an awe-inspiring choice by Michael Winger and Will Dawkins, by Ted Leonsis, by whoever else was involved in this process. Winger and Dawkins, certainly the two biggest folks. But I'm fine with that. I think it would be arrogant of me to come on this radio station and pretend, for as much as I know about the NBA, for as deeply as I followed it, for as long as I followed it, that I have some in-depth knowledge of assistant coaches around the league and who's got it and who doesn't. I just don't. And I know that there are bigger names, and those bigger names are not necessarily bigger names because they're outstanding coaches. A lot of them are bigger names because they played and then became assistant coaches, and many of them probably will be head coaches and maybe even good NBA head coaches one day. I think of a name like Sam Cassell, who's seemingly been a lead assistant for a long time. And I think of Sam Cassell, by the way, on a day where Ty Lue signs one of the biggest coaching contracts in sports history, nevertheless NBA history, as a guy who was seemingly on the sideline for a little bit as an assistant, as a former player, under Doc Rivers, and then in Cleveland under David Blatt, and then takes over when they fire Blatt. And holy crap, Ty Lue's an amazing head coach. But so is Brian Daigneault, the head coach of the Thunder, Mark Daigneault, the head coach of the Thunder, who won NBA Coach of the Year. So is Nick Nurse, who's now with the Sixers, and it's led the Toronto Raptors to a title. Guys that did not play at the NBA level, that were good assistants for a long time in some cases, and just eventually elevated to the top job because someone realized that they're good enough to do it. And I think this situation's a little bit different because Brian Keefe is a guy who led the Wizards to an absolutely miserable record in the second half of the season. Now, there are a lot of factors that went into that, but they still were terrible record-wise. They just didn't win a lot of games. But I think you have to look at how they played, and this is a lot of what I think Will Dawkins and Michael Winger are doing and what they are great at and what they learned how to do in Oklahoma City under Sam Presti, which is look at the underlying data, look at the trends, and ask yourself 2 questions. Are we going in the right direction? And do we think that this person can get us to where we want to go? If the answer to that is both, yes, then that's probably a pretty good hire. Because wins and losses are just one very ultimately important statistic when it's time to really compete. But how competitive you are over the courses of quarters, of halves, of games, over the course of weeks, and then ultimately months matters. And ultimately, once you influx or you inject talent into an atmosphere, an environment, and a schematic way of playing, style of play, and not to mention the individual plays themselves, especially like a half court or which your defensive coverages are, et cetera. Once you inject talent into that, that's going to affect the wins and losses more than anything. How you play is different than who you're playing. How you play comes down to your identity and how you work every day and what your habits are. And it seems like Brian Keefe is very good at those things. Now, I think the question becomes, because, by the way, Wes Unseld was seen as very good as those things, and many other assistant coaches who have taken that 6-inch yet Grand Canyon-sized leap down the bench into that main seat have often been great at those things. The question is then, can you do the management stuff? Can you do the things you need to do as the actual head lead of an organization to get everybody going in that direction? Can you take your hands off of, if your hands are on the wheel now of the entire vehicle, if you're responsible for another part, you typically don't fix cars while they're moving, so this is not exactly the world's greatest analogy. But if you can let go of the things that you were doing as an assistant and empower and entrust other people to do them and steer the ship in the right direction. And by the way, now those assistants are doing the things you did at basically the same level, and there's multiple of them. Well, you become a force multiplier for doing the things that got you the job in the first place. But those things and that skill set of being that force multiplier, being that leader, being someone that instills big picture ideals, nevertheless, more micro level schemes and, details into the organization are very different skill sets in terms of being a visionary, being the big picture versus someone who is executing the details of a plan that was given to them by someone else, right? It's one thing to be a salesman. It's one thing to be a sales manager. It's one thing to be the CEO of the company. It's another to work on the factory floor. You need both to be ultimately successful, right? You need someone with a good strategic vision and an understanding of how the pieces fit together to run the actual company. But if you're running a gigantic factory and the people working in the factory aren't incredibly skilled at the very specific thing that they're doing, your company is screwed. And so ultimately what the Wizards have said here is we think that Brian Keefe's experience of someone who has worked at all of the different levels of the factory underneath the person running it, if you will. He's been the guy fixing the machines. He's been the janitor. Then he got to work on the factory floor, putting together the pieces. Then he was kind of a manager and advisor to the big wigs upstairs. They think that's prepared him to be upstairs. And considering who hired him, that's actually completely unsurprising. Because Will Dawkins is the same person, just on the management side. Will Dawkins has spent time picking guys up from the airport as basically a glorified gopher when he first started in Seattle. Then he was a behind-the-bench coach. Then he worked his way into scouting, and he was a low-level scout. And then he got up, and then he got up again, and he got promoted within Oklahoma City's system until he was their assistant GM. And then ultimately Michael Winger was like, I remember you from when I was there in Oklahoma City. And by the way, Oklahoma City continues to be one of the best front offices in the league. And by the way, Will Dawkins' scouting acumen was well known. But he had this larger vision that when he and Michael talked and they interviewed for that job after Winger had been hired by Leonsis, that Dawkins was like, yeah, I'm ready for this moment because I've seen it up and down from every angle, from the front office, from the bench. he was a albeit a college player at Emerson, like he was a player. Like that understanding of every piece of an organization helps you be a good leader. And so while Brian Keefe, because he has no name value, like almost negative name value, because the Wizards' record was god awful the second half of the season, what they're banking on is that was a reflection of the team that they put on the floor, the guys wearing the jerseys. It wasn't, and by the way, the hole that they were digging out of, that Wes Unseld Jr. primarily is going to be responsible for, or held responsible for, and was responsible for, because he was the head coach who was digging it. And what they're telling us is that when we replace the other pieces around, when we upgrade the talent, when we let Brian Keefe set the standard from go, when we allow him to be someone who sets the standard and is a force multiplier versus the person he was previously working for, that will change the fortune of the organization. And I don't know that they're going to be wrong about that. Again, uninspiring? Sure. Effective? TBD. And if we want to look back and say, hey, it's been about a year since Winger got here, in many ways, that's the theme of it all. Not much of what they've done has been super inspiring. Not much of what they've done has brought a whole lot of joy. But as someone who has been around this sport for a long time, someone who's covered it for a long time, I will just tell you my opinion. I think they're doing the right things. I think these guys are really smart. I understand it's going to take time. They understand it's going to take time. Ted understands it's going to take time. And while they don't have forever, they absolutely understand that there is no use in chasing instant gratification, and thus they should do the thing they think is best. And I think that is what they're doing here. And all we can do is trust them for now. And if in 3 years they haven't gotten anywhere, then we say, hey, time to let someone else make these decisions. But for right now, I wish I could tell you this is an A+ home run, slam dunk hire. Pick your analogy, pick your metaphor. But I just don't know. And I also understand it, and I get it, and we'll see how effective it is. We're going to get some more insight as we go here, and we'll take some of your calls. 301-230-0980. Brian Keefe is the new Wizards coach. The interim becomes the permanent, or at least the non-interim tag. None of these jobs are permanent, as all people working in sports know all too well. But Brian Keefe is your 26th ever head coach of the Washington Wizards. Your calls to react to that next. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980 as well. And we have breaking news that we've been telling you about for the last 30 minutes or so. And that is that Brian Keefe has been named as head coach of the Washington Wizards. And we got a couple of guests that I think we're probably going to have some folks calling in the 6 o'clock hour. But Anthony, I will say this. When Dan Quinn was hired, we couldn't take enough phone calls. How many people we got on the phones right now?
We have 0.
That's right. No one. I respect what they're doing with the Wizards in terms of the slowness of this rebuild, because I ultimately think that it is the right thing to do to win a championship. And if you're not gunning for championships, what the hell's the point? It's something that I think really frustrates me about professional sports and how a lot of teams are run. And it's something that I'm actually extremely grateful for in this current time, although there's going to be a long lead time here, that both the Commanders and the Wizards, the two teams that we talk about the most, I think understand this. I think if the Washington Commanders wanted to go 8-8 this year, they could very easily. They couldn't very easily because they now play a very silly 17-game schedule, and going 8-8, while it's fun to talk about, is almost statistically impossible. You can go 8-8-1, as Ron Rivera once reminded us. But to go 9-8 or 8-9 is not that difficult. And Josh Harris talked about that at this point, a little bit over a year ago at a summit, where he's just like, yeah, if you wanna beeline for the middle, that ain't that hard. You can take some shortcuts and get there. Spend a little bit of money in free agency, do whatever you got to do in the draft, and you're just going to cap your ceiling, and you're probably not going to give yourself a realistic chance at winning a Super Bowl versus being more diligent about how you build your team and reserving resources for the right time, the right people that will ultimately take your ceiling to championship level. And I think that is even more true in the NBA, where you need a Hall of Fame player to win a championship. It is impossible to not have a Hall of Famer on your team and win a title. Like it's I don't know why I've never phrased it that way before, but it really is that simple, right? If at the end of the day you need LeBron James, Stephen Curry, or even some of the more exception level players, Dirk Nowitzki wins 1 title in 2011. He's still Dirk Nowitzki. Like Kawhi Leonard, 2019 Raptors. Kawhi's a Hall of Famer. A frustrating player, but Kawhi's a Hall of Famer. Giannis, whoever wins this year, Luka, Anthony Edwards, like those guys are probably future Hall of Famers. Jason Tatum certainly is on track to be a future Hall of Famer. You don't have to be the guy. You don't have to be the best player in the sport. But like, if you don't have a Hall of Famer as the best player on your team, you ain't winning anything. Because there's 5 dudes on the court at once. And so, I'm okay with this, hey, we got to figure out how to get the Hall of Famer, if not Hall of Famers, on our team. But there is a reality here of exactly what it takes to do that is probably going to dampen some enthusiasm in the short term. And I think that, combined with the lack of sexiness in the hire of Brian Keefe, the interim coach who just lost a ton of games, our phone lines are not exactly blowing up. We do have a couple calls, and Anthony, I'm about to tell you something off the air that's going to light up our phones. Actually, I can just say it on the air. Ava said she can do now. So can you call Ava for me? You give me a thumbs up. You have Ava's number? Okay, cool. So Ava Wallace from the Post is going to join us for about 5 minutes in about 2 minutes, as quickly as Anthony can get her on the phone. But real quick, we can go to Dimitri. Dimitri, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, how's it going?
Going well.
Yeah, not a sexy pick, absolutely, but the way they were kind of like lack of energy under Unseld Jr. near the end of his tenure there, it was good to see somebody who was young and kind of eager for the job and invigorated. And you could kind of see that even though they were having the losses, they were playing with a little bit more energy, and he wasn't afraid to tinker with the lineup, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And
good possibility.
Dimitri, thanks for the call. And sorry to go quick here, but Anthony's very fast. So we got Ava with us now. Ava Wallace from the Washington Post, of course, their Wizards beat reporter. Hey, friend, didn't think I was going to talk to you today.
Nice 5 p.m. news dump for us all on this Wednesday.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So why ultimately, to cut straight to the point, did they say, despite the record and we're doing this big expansive search, they wind up coming right back to the guy who was the intern for them in the back half of last year?
Yeah, listen, the Wizards are a rebuilding team who needs someone who, one, can kind of handle the room and whose voice is effective in a locker room that needs a lot of guidance and a lot of kind of ego management there with a bunch of different types of personalities. That's every NBA locker room. But Brian Keefe has a shown track record with young players in particular, and he really got through to this group. This was a roster that really needed kind of a change of something to get their energy back. I saw you there, listened to you guys right before I was on. They were definitely kind of falling apart and just letting themselves get blown out in games for the first half of the season, and that was something that Brian Keefe came in and changed kind of immediately. First, it was kind of, honeymoon period, something's new. Okay, let's see what happens later. But it really did last till the end of the season. And he handled a lot of tough conversations in that locker room very well.
Yeah, no, I mean, the demeanor of the team and kind of the seriousness with which they took the back half of the season, not to mention, I think, Ava, something that we talked about during his ability to get more out of guys, and specifically in the back half of the season, Jordan Poole, than was happening prior, and some of the tough conversations that had undoubtedly earned him a lot of respect. What have you been able to find out about some of those conversations and how Keefe was able to handle them with such grace, finesse, whatever words you want to use to describe what ultimately turns into efficacy?
Yeah, I think efficacy is the right word. All the players that I've spoken to said that they really appreciated his directness. I mean, this is a blunt dude who kind of tells you what he's thinking, tells you how it should be, and there's not really accepting anything else there. Even if you ask him, oh, what's the second message, or how do you what if this breaks down? No, there's not really much of that with Brian Keefe. He's a really direct communicator, which doesn't mean he can't handle sensitive situations, but I think he's really good at talking to players kind of how they like to be talked to as basketball players, as someone who he's coming in and saying, I want to maximize your potential here. He was part of that decision to send Jordan Poole to the bench, and he was the one who had to tell him. And, Jordan Poole was not happy. He made that very clear that he was not happy. And Brian Keefe kind of moved on and let it work itself out. And that's how he played that.
A few more quick minutes here with Ava Wallace, Wizards beat reporter for the Washington Post, on the heels of the breaking news that the Wizards have hired Brian Keefe as their full-time head coach, removing the interim tag. He's the 26th head coach in franchise history. So that bluntness, Ava, it's one thing to do that over a short period of time when you're the interim and there's kind of this just, hey, let's fight our way out of this mentality in the back half of last season. He's now in charge of the full program for hopefully a decade. Like that's of course the goal that Michael Winger and Will Dawkins would tell us all. So how does that play, and how do you think this works for him as the guy in charge with a much longer, road ahead of him than just land the plane safely and get us to the end of the season?
Yeah, I actually think I would maybe adjust those expectations. I think as the Wizards are kind of rebuilding and getting their feet under them, they're not as much worried about, someone like a Phoenix Suns who needs a face of the franchise, who needs someone to sell their teams. Wizards definitely need people to sell their team. That's not necessarily coming from the coach. But I would say he is in charge of kind of landing the plane, keeping everything on track. Brian Keefe has a lot of history with Will Dawkins, the general manager, and Michael Winger, the president of Monumental Basketball. They kind of all come from the same place, the Oklahoma City kind of, farm, where they all really think and grew up in the NBA in kind of the same environment. So I think he's somebody who's definitely going to work very well with the front office to implement what they want to implement over the next few years. And then he can work well with the young guys. So for him, I don't want to say expectations are low, because I do not think they're low with this front office. But I do think he has a really long leash to just teach these guys how to play right basketball, or basketball the right way, how to be good on court, how to be professional players, and help us grow into a team. And I honestly think they're not saying worry about the next 10 years or anything like that with the Wizards right now, because the long-term planning is staying with the front office, I think.
Last thing for you. God bless you. You were with this team every day during the season. So what was your favorite? What's your favorite Keefe story from the time he took over?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know if I have a favorite Keefe story. This guy is a real, like, hardcore basketball guy. Like, he goes into it was really funny being in press conferences with him when he was finally the one talking. Like, he'd walk into the Celtics press room, and of course he grew up in Boston, so he has, deep history and respect for the Celtics, but he's like shouting out reporters that he knew when he was an assistant in Seattle the first year that he was with the Sonics. Like, this guy is a 16-year NBA veteran, and he knows a lot of people. So it's very fun kind of just trailing him around an NBA arena, and he's really good with remembering faces and names, and he's been around the block for sure.
That's great, actually, and gives you, like, that is a really important head coaching trait. It's so small, but, like, you have to be good with people, and him actually knowing all that stuff is actually really encouraging, as opposed to just being like this basketball hard ass. It's like, do it again, which is kind of, I feel like, how some people have painted him. Ava, thank you so much for your time. I know you're very, very busy, and we'll be looking forward to what you write in the Washington Post.
Thanks so much, buddy.
That is Ava Wallace with us here on the Hoffman Show. When we get back, more of your calls. Brian Keefe's the new Wizards coach. What's your thoughts on it? 301-230-0980. Your calls next. Final hour of the Hoffman Show on a breaking news day here on the Team 980. That's right. The Wizards have made news. They have hired Brian Keefe as their next head coach. The interim coach in the back half of the season gets the full-time gig. BK on the job. What do you think? 301-230-0980. More expert opinions coming over the next hour. But your calls as well. Get some reaction from the fans. And let's start off with Don. Don, thanks for calling. Thanks for holding. You are on the Hoffman Show. What do you think of the Wizards hiring Brian Keefe?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Craig. Look, I'm one of the few callers that you're ever going to hear say that the Wiz are my 1A and the Commanders are my 1B. So I've been following this team for a long time. I kind of expected this to be the hire. And the reason why I kind of expected it to be the hire is because it fits in with everything that's been said by Ava Wallace, by what you outlined earlier, and what they seem to be trying to do. They were looking for a coach who is going to come in and is going to build a foundation, teach fundamentals, establish a culture of discipline, establish a culture of defense, which we haven't seen in I don't know how long. As a matter of fact, I think the only coach this team has hired previously it was like Vandy Whitman. I see a lot of similarities in their coaching demeanor and what we can expect from him as the full-time guy. The only concern that I have is, one, I'd really like to know what the terms of the contract are. And the other thing I'd like to know is who is going to support this guy in terms of what kind of staff is going to be able to put together. Because when you're working with these youngsters like they're going to be working with for the next 2 to 3 years, you got to bring in some teachers. And I hope that he's going to be allowed to, and I'm pretty sure that Winger and Dawson are going to do this, bring in some quality assistant coaches to assist him. Because it's going to be 2 to 3 years before we see any type of major product on the court.
No doubt about it. Don, great call, and appreciate you holding on to give us your take. Keefe knows a lot of people, as Ava just talked about. This dude's been around the league for 16 years. He's been a part of some of the best organizations who have won a lot. And what that means is, like, if you're the seventh guy on a crap staff that gets fired, it's real hard to get another job, right? Because you're the seventh guy on a crap staff. But what happens is if you're the seventh guy on a good staff, you probably get elevated to the sixth guy, the fifth guy, because people above you get hired. And maybe even you get hired to go be the fifth guy somewhere else or the fourth guy because you go from behind the bench to being on the bench, right? And so as those coaches go elsewhere that are Oklahoma City guys specifically, but also, some of the Knicks coaches from 14 to 16 and, Brooklyn had a couple of good years that he was a part of some good staffs. Like there's going to be guys that are out there that have been around a lot of winning, that have a lot of experience, that are still in the league, but maybe they got caught on the wrong staff last year and they got fired. Or they were the sixth guy when Keefe was the seventh guy, and now they're the third guy somewhere else, and Keefe has climbed the ladder faster, and they're kind of stuck, and they can come be the number two guy here, and they're a really good coach. Like, these are the kinds of things that happen when you're a part of good organizations is, or, by the way, maybe the third guy when Keefe was the seventh guy is now the head guy somewhere else, and he's got a fourth guy that's ready to be a third guy. You always got to have a guy. Point is, the more people you know in a successful organization as they spread out throughout the league. And I've even seen this, I think of the people I know in the NFL because I covered Sean and Kevin. Nevertheless, the folks that have been here long enough to cover Kyle. Like, if you covered Kyle Shanahan in that 2013 team, you now know 5 NFL head coaches because you knew Mike McDaniel when he was the assistant to the whatever and LaFleur when he was the assistant to the whatever. Kyle knows so many people around the league, in part just because he's been here so long. And even though Commanders haven't even won, that staff has spread out and spread its wings. And then, you get introduced to new people because, hey, great to see you, John. This is my assistant, whoever, said Kyle Shanahan. And that person goes on to be a head coach and whatever. So, point is, Keefe is going to have options. He knows a lot of people. He definitely needs to bring in great staff. But I do think one thing that I'll give Leonsis credit for is when he hired Winger, he empowered Michael and thus Will and thus who they hire to hire those people. Like the budget, it exists, but I don't think it's going to be an issue, which is nice. And I don't know that it was necessarily the way things were done in the past. Let's go to Mello. Mello, what you feel about this hire of Brian Keefe as the Wizards' next head coach?
Hey, Craig, thanks for taking my call. So appreciate my first time calling.
Appreciate that.
I'm not as excited as the last caller. Some of the things the last caller said I was thinking of in terms of teaching these young guys how to play and things of that nature. We're talking about professional players. I wonder why Mark Jackson was never considered. He may have been considered, but Unseld had the same kind of reputation, knowing a lot of people in the league. You see where that got him. I'm just not as optimistic, and I'm very concerned that we constantly go on this Ferris wheel of hope, and we end up in the same space.
I mean, let me ask
really
you.
Not excited about it.
Here's the thing, though. You mentioned Mark Jackson, right? And this is a name that's come up a lot. And Mark Jackson hasn't worked as a coach in the league since 2013. That doesn't scare you more than a guy who is getting his first shot at it?
Well, nobody's scared of J.J. Redick, and he's never coached at all.
Right, but he's never coached. That's my point, is Mark did. He got fired. He's interviewed for a bunch of other jobs since then, and nobody hired him.
Right. I mean, you're making a great point, Craig, and I wish I could have more time. I wish I could have more time to give you my answer, but I know you have other callers. I'm going to just say this. Mark Jackson has a stellar reputation, and he knows the game of basketball. And I think that the point guard position, which we're deficient in, don't forget, he actually was the reason Stern became the player he became. He was at the origin of that. So I think there's something to be said about that you can't overlook.
No, it's always my retort with Jackson, which is to say, I think Mark Wood did a lot of good stuff. I also think that firing him and going to Steve Kerr was the perfect 1-2 combination to unlock the Warriors for what they became. I think it's interesting. But when it comes to things that scare me, a guy that hasn't coached in a decade, that tells me something.
And the game is so different
for
now.
Sure. For sure. And Mello, I appreciate the call. Please don't make it your last, even though it was your first. Much appreciated. You listening and calling in. I think that with Keefe, there's going to be questions. But your options are always, you can get a guy who's never done it before, or you can get a guy who was fired. 98% of the time, that's what we're talking about. Sometimes the guys get fired because ownership and general managers and players screwed them over, and they're actually good coaches. That happens all the time in this league. But I just think that it's to look at one archetype and be like, hey, I don't know, because this, I can point you examples of this kind of coach that have succeeded and this kind of coach that have failed. Wes Unseld didn't work here. Highly touted assistant. Again, Mark Daigneault in Oklahoma City, coach of the year, 1 seed. Nick Nurse won a title in Toronto. And then, by the way, he was the guy who got fired. He's been both, because that's how you got to start. Eventually, every successful coach was at one point an assistant who had never done it before. Unless you're like J.J. Redick, you get hired out of a broadcast booth. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. The breaking news is not that J.J. Redick has been hired out of the broadcast booth. He is still broadcasting as of now, even though there's a lot of smoke around him to the Lakers. It is that Brian Keefe will be the next Wizards head coach. Our pal Chase Hughes from Monumental Sports Network joins us to discuss, and we'll take more of your calls as we go as well here on your home for Wizards basketball, the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. And we're joined now by our pal Chase Hughes from the Monumental Sports Network. Chase, of course, covering the Wizards. What's up, dude? How are you?
Not much. Doing great. I was actually just listening to you on my way home. Got stuck in traffic, and of course, that's when the news breaks that they've hired Brian Keefe as their full-time head coach. That's how it always goes, as you well know.
Yes, no. So I was going to ask, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I guess I'll ask seriously because I guess I know the answer now. Because now, you work for Monumental Sports, and you can't just call up Michael Winger and be like, I know we're kind of separate because I'm media and you're doing the basketball thing, but like, bro, can you give me a heads up? Like, you don't get nothing here. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of knew that it was going to happen this week, but I was just in the office. Someone could have told me that it was going to happen during my commute home, but
that would have been
alas.
nice. Alas. Well, thanks for listening, and now thanks for calling, as we say here in the business. What is your reaction to the news? I mean, very simply to start, Chase, like this is. You heard what we've been saying and what the callers have been saying. It's not the sexiest move at all. We kind of anticipated in many ways this would happen. Why do you think it happened? Why do Michael and Will make this move, and what do you make of it?
Well, I'm not surprised. I think it had become a foregone conclusion. And the reason why I felt that way is because at the end of the season, I thought Brian Keefe had done a nice job and had sort of met the criteria that Will Dawkins and Michael Winger had set forth. But it wasn't until I started talking to people around the league in the first few weeks of the offseason that I really kind of gathered that a lot of people around the league thought that Brian Keefe was going to get the job, that people that maybe would have been interested in the job in other circumstances felt like no one outside the organization was the favorite compared to Brian Keefe, so he was the favorite all along. And I think it makes sense why, because going back to the guidelines that Winger and Dawkins set, when they promoted Brian Keefe to the interim job, they said that they were happy with the individual development of their players, but they wanted to see a more competitive team overall. And it took a little while, but I think Brian Keefe got them there. And by the end of the season, they had some of their best wins of the year with him at the helm. And defensively, they were better. And I think accountability was a big reason why they made this move because, he showed that he could hold players accountable. And you heard it from them that he's got a very blunt, sort of straight shooter type communication style. And I think the move that epitomized that was putting Jordan Poole on the bench. That's the type of accountability that we haven't often seen with the Wizards, to put a star player on the bench like that. And he was the guy who was able to make that move and bring the best out of Jordan Poole after doing it.
So we've heard stories like that, obviously, throughout the season, Chase. But, I think that when you're a head coach, as you well know, having covered not only, the Wizards like you have, but having covered Major League Baseball and all the different things you've done over the years in your career here in D.C., head coaches, managers, whatever it is, whatever that top coaching job is across the sport, you have to have a big picture outlook of how your team is going to operate. How would you say Brian Keefe handled that part of the job? Because we know he's a great player developer. That's why he was the lead assistant and why he's got the resume he's got. But how did he handle that part of the job in the back half of the season?
Well, I think he matches their timeline in the rebuild overall. You mentioned the player development. That's a big part of it. And the accountability factor, I think, can help them set the type of culture that they want to have is sort of the foundation for the future. So him being a first-time head coach, but also being experienced, also having the track record of working with all the great players that he's worked with over the years. I mean, Kevin Durant, among them this past season, really sang Brian Keefe's praises in a press conference, saying that, he owes a lot to Brian Keefe. And so I think all those things made him the right guy for the job. And the fact that he is inexperienced as a head coach, I think fits the timeline because they're going to bring a lot of young players into this program. And he's the right guy now, but he also may be able to grow into the right guy when they need the type of coach that can help lead them to the playoffs and contend for the bigger things that they hope to compete for down the road. So I would say that the track record of player development and also the fact that he's not someone who's been a head coach at a really high level before, I think he sort of fits the timeline of a young roster trying to build things from the bottom up.
When you look at this roster, there's obviously going to be some changes over the next couple of weeks. At the very least, there will be an influx of young talent, number 2 pick, number 26 pick, and or however they reorganize themselves in the draft. There's always trades around this time of year. There's obviously free agency coming and some pretty big decisions. Tyus Jones probably being the most notable there for a player that's got to decide whether or not he's coming back. When you think of kind of Keith's style of play and some of the things that obviously goes up to Will, and Will has talked a lot about style of play, like what is this team, what are the holes, and how does Brian Keith affect that conversation?
Well, I think they want to be much better defensively than they were last year, and that's where he kind of fits in. I think they changed the way that they defended last year after he took over. There was less switching. There was more on-ball responsibilities. And I think they're going to be able to help themselves in the draft this year because, for whatever has been said about this draft class, a lot of the guys at the top, a lot of the players that are in consideration for the second overall pick, defense is a big part of why they're top prospects in this draft class. And so I think, whether it's a rim protector or another wing defender or somebody who can stop the ball in the perimeter at the guard position, there'll be more pieces to work with. And, guys like Denny Avdi and Bilal Coulibaly will have more help on the defensive end. And I think Brian Keith will be tasked with sort of putting it all together. So I really think their offseason, like this was obviously first order of business in some respects, but a lot of it hinges directly on what they do with the second overall pick, because whatever player they pick, whatever position they play, that's going to dictate their needs at that position moving forward. And it might dictate a lot more than that because it's going to be, by far the biggest resource they've spent so far on building this roster from the ground up. So they're going to make sure that that player has every opportunity possible to play a lot of minutes, to take a lot of shots, and to have their strengths maximized. So that'll be up to Brian Keith, but I would point to the defensive end as where they can maybe start building something next year.
Chase Hughes, Monumental Sports Network, with us here on the Hoffman Show. Just in. Chase's colleague, Jason Smith, he's very tall. He's going to join us coming up at 6:30 to react to the breaking news that Brian Keith is the next Wizards head coach, the interim now getting the full-time job. So wrapping up with you here, Chase, for Keith, the biggest thing he needs to accomplish in 2024 in the 24-25 season is what? Like, what is in your mind the definition of success in a year where the record is still not going to be the primary driver? And even with that said, last season was not what anybody in the organization, as Winger and Dawkins told us after the year, what they wanted it to be. How do they make next year's season-ending press conference different?
I think produce a good baseline for whoever the second overall pick is. That player is going to be so important for their future. Obviously, you want to see guys like Denny Avdi and Bilal Coulibaly continue to build on what they've done. Corey Kispert, all their young guys. Jordan Poole, hopefully, if he's on the team, can have the success that he did down the stretch of last year. But that second overall pick is going to become, really the centerpiece of their future. So if that player can come in and, have an all-rookie campaign, and show some signs of being a real difference maker down the road, I think that would make the season a success on its own. But certainly seeing all those young guys take steps forward would qualify as a great and successful season.
Chase Hughes be talking about this and writing about it for the Monumental Sports Network. Chase, appreciate your time on short notice, man, and safe drive the rest of the way home if you're not there yet.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That is Chase Hughes, everybody. When we get back, Jason Smith, double-digit years in the NBA. You see him on the pre- and post-game for Monumental Sports Network on Wizards coverage. Joins us to talk about Brian Keith being named the next head coach of the Washington Wizards. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We are streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980 as well. And it is our pleasure to welcome back to the show to react to breaking news, something that we make a habit of at least once per year. Our pal Jason Smith, of course, analyst for Monumental Sports Network. Jason, last year, I think we were at the draft when we had you crash the show after the Jordan Poole trade. Today, we don't have you just, walking around here, but thanks for calling in on the heels of the Brian Keefe news.
Absolutely, and this is monumental news, no pun intended, Monumental Sports Network.
That's not what no pun intended means, Jason. No pun intended means you didn't mean to do it. You very clearly meant to do that.
I promise you I didn't mean to do that. But the fact that Brian Keefe got the job and promoted to full-time head coach, I think it's a testament to his success, not necessarily at the end of the season, but as an assistant coach relating to the players, but also building players up towards the end of the season. You saw the success of Jordan Poole going from the bench, then coming back into the starting lineup, but you also saw a lot of different players. They were playing harder, they were playing more aggressive, and it was individual, growth, you could say. I want to see that individual growth transfer to team growth, and I think Brian Keefe can do that in this next coming year.
From a player's perspective, like you have from your many years in the league, what's the biggest difference in what you need out of an assistant coach versus what you need out of a head coach?
Well, the biggest thing is that an assistant coach just works with individual players. The head coach actually has a determining factor of what plays we're going to run on offense, what plays we're going to run on defense, and really puts guys into position to have success. Now, going forward, they have the number 2 pick in the draft. They also have another pick in the draft. But I want to see what they do with that pick, if they trade it away, if they keep it, if they go after the French big guy. There's a lot of different ways they could go about with it. But you have to remember, first and foremost, this is a team that is rebuilding. It doesn't happen in 1 year. It doesn't happen in 2 years. This is going to take time to get these young players developed. And I think the biggest thing, the young players, they got a chance to play big-time games towards the end of the season. You saw the growth of the young players like Bilal Coulibaly. He did a great job of proving to not only the front office and the coaches, but also the fan base of what kind of player he is and getting out of the shadow of Victor Wembanyama, of becoming a great defender, a knockdown three-point shooter, but also a player who's going to play hard on the defensive end and attacking the basket on the offensive end towards the later end of the season. He got hurt, however, but you got to see that glimpse of what he can be for the future if he continues to work.
Now, Jason, as I look at your Pro Basketball Reference page and I do the mental math here, was Keefe an assistant with you in the Knicks in 2014?
He was. We definitely did cross paths, and he was actually one of the assistant coaches that worked with me pre-practice, post-practice, pre-game stuff. So I know firsthand what kind of coach he is, and the fact that he is now in a head coaching role, it's a testament to his work ethic, not only in one organization with the Knicks, but he kind of bounced around he went to the Knicks, he went to Brooklyn, he was out in Phoenix for a little bit. That's a coach's lifestyle, but once you get an opportunity as a head coach, you kind of want to make your mark on the NBA. If you have success with it, you can kind of stay around for years. He's in a tough predicament in a rebuilding situation. He wants to go out there and prove, hey, I can build quality players with people who are not necessarily well known. But if we get a good core group of young guys and we build up the franchise, hopefully he'll have success with that.
Yeah, no doubt. And obviously he had the many years in Oklahoma City where he crossed with Dawkins and Winger, and you got the history there. But for you, when you worked with Brian in New York, what was he like to work with day in, day out, up close?
Well, it was consistency. It was all about consistency and being a professional, because with New York, it's a tough place to play with the media, with the fan base, but also you take this and transfer it to D.C. It's tough to go out there and have a good showing night in and night out when you don't necessarily know the players that you're going to have. So that's something that's really going to kind of be pending on going into the draft and going into free agency. But once you get the solidarity of what the lineup and what the roster is going to be looking like, he's going to have a right to go out there and put the best performers on the floor. Not necessarily to go out there and win games per se. Obviously, you want to go out there and win games. You're an NBA team. You want to compete every night. But for a young team who's trying to build the right way, I want to see what kind of style offense he plays. I want to see what kind of style defense he plays, because he didn't necessarily get to have his mark on the team halfway through the season going into the head coaching role from the assistant coach. Anytime you do that, You're just trying to keep the ship afloat, trying to have individual success with players. Now that he's going to be heading into a new season as the head guy, really even before the draft, so he's going to have input on who they draft. He's going to have input on free agency picks that he wants to build the team with. But granted, Will Dawkins, they're going to have control of the team of, all right, this is the way we want to shape it. We're going to go with young guys, or we're going to get a couple veterans here and there to kind of point them in the right direction. So that's where I kind of want to see where the team's direction goes.
Jason Smith, analyst for Monumental Sports Network, with us here on the Hoffman Show. Of course, long, great NBA career that ended here in Washington, and then he decided to stay and be on television. So, Jason, you mentioned the Will Dawkins' impact on the basketball, and I think it's really interesting listening to Will and Michael talk, and they talk about certain metrics they want to hit, play style, pace, things, and it's very clear that there's going to be a front office directive on certain things that maybe in other organizations are driven by coaching. I'm curious, in your career, if you worked with, or you played in any organization that had a heavy front office impact, and how obviously these guys are familiar with each other. Brian Keefe knows what he's signing up for. I'm not trying to predispose some kind of conflict that doesn't exist here. But when an organization has this very clear directive, and you could even go as far as to calling it vision from the front office, and how that then translates down into the coaching staff and down into the players, did you have experiences like that? And how do you think that tends to go?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. So for me, my personal experience, I had that in New Orleans, to where the front office was really trying to get young core group of guys, because they pressed the reset button after they traded Chris Paul to the Clippers. So you had Anthony Davis come in as the first pick. You had Austin Rivers come in as the 10th pick. And it's really getting the coaching staff to realize, hey, we may not win a lot of games, but we want to go out there and be competitive, but also developing these young guys to learn how to play a long NBA season. And really, every game matters. That's the biggest thing for players nowadays. The young players, they come in and they can kind of get overwhelmed by an 82-game season. If you have that mentality of it's a marathon, it's not a sprint by any means. And if you can go out there and consistently, depending on if it's the best team in the league or the worst team in the league, if you go out there and do the same showing, now granted, it's just a part of sports. You play up to your competition, but you can also play down to your competition. Going out there in the tricky manners of, hey, maybe this team's going to overlook us. Go out there and play with no worries. Go out there and play freely. That's what I think that the coaching staff has to translate to the team, of saying, hey, the pressure's not on us. The pressure's on the other team to beat us. We just want to go out there and do the right things on the offensive end, execute our defensive concepts. And if we lose, we lose. If we win, we gather the information of what we did right, apply it to the next team, apply it to the next game. So that's the biggest thing for me.
I think that's great. And I think we see that a lot of times for the transition of college to pro. I think we're seeing it right now, frankly, in the W, with like Caitlin Clark has lost more games this season than she did in probably her last 3 years at Iowa. You see this all the time with, I'm trying to think of who it was a couple of years ago. There was an NBA rookie that came in and they hit a veteran hit a game winner on like the opening night, and the rookie goes nuts and is celebrating. And the vet was like, dude, chill out. Like, this was fun, but we got 81 more. And so
Yep.
I'm curious how a coach like Brian's consistency can help shape a young team to get into that groove that you just talked about, where your focus is on doing the right things and to use the buzzword, the process over the results of wins and losses.
Well, I think the most important thing is to really not get too high in wins and not get too low in losses. And I think that it doesn't necessarily come from just the coaching staff. If you have your veteran players out there who have won at the highest level, a la Kyle Kuzma, I mean, he has a championship under his belt with the LA Lakers. So if you have a mentality like that, and he can bring that and kind of guide the younger players, like, man, we just had a 15-point comeback at home. Man, this was a great win. Okay, celebrate the win that night, get a good night's sleep, have a good meal. But the next day, you got to prepare for the next team that's coming in 2 days, in the next day. It could be a back-to-back. So the more you can kind of be like, all right, that was nice, that was good, let's do it again. Let's do it again. And don't get bored with that process, because winning is a grind. Because as soon as you start winning and you start getting more media and more press to follow you, then you have the target on your back. Then you have to learn how to win in a different way. Everybody's going to be giving you your best shot. So there's a transition of, all right, we're building for success. And then once you have success, how do you keep that success?
So I'll wrap up with you, Jason, with the same question that I asked your colleague Chase Hughes a little bit earlier, which is, for Brian Keefe in 2024, just this season, 24-25? Like, what success do you think for him as a coach in year one?
I want to see him have success individually with players and see what his offensive schemes and defensive schemes are. Now, I can't really predict what the season is going to be like. I can probably say that they're not going to win too many games, but I want to see them head in the right direction. I want to see Denny take another step. I want to see Kyle Kuzma take another step in his leadership role, but also Bilal Coulibaly and whoever they draft in this draft, and then possibly going into free agency. Who comes in with free agency? Do they go for the veteran style, or do they go more towards younger players? So that's what I really want to see. And as far as the coaching staff, go out there and put your imprint on this organization. What kind of style of basketball are you going to play? Are you going to go with that run and gun style that you had last year? And are you going to throw up a bunch of threes like you did last year? And are we going to get a set defense concept out there? Everybody on a string, moving side to side. And once you do get a turnover or they make the basket, don't sulk about it, but get the ball out quick and run it right back at them, because I cannot see that this organization is going to go for an old style basketball, half-court style basketball. If you have young players, utilize that youth. Run. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, that would be very fun. Hopefully it will lead to some more wins, and we will be watching it no matter what on Monumental Sports Network. And if nothing else is entertaining, at least we have you and Wes, before halftime and after the games.
Absolutely. That's what I'm talking about.
I mean, you want entertainment. Come on. Right there. I mean, just follow you guys on Instagram, you clowning around. Nevertheless, what you guys do on television, they actually have some rules there. I mean, good God, put you two on the internet. Lord knows what. You guys wouldn't have jobs by the end of the week.
Yeah, we might hurt our own reputations if you put us on the internet with no rules there.
yeah, it's dangerous, but it's okay. That's why we put you on television. Jason, always appreciate it, man. If we don't talk to you for the rest of the summer, have a great summer. Although I'm sure around free agency and the draft, we'll be in touch.
Oh, absolutely. Hit me up anytime. Appreciate you guys for having me.
Absolutely. That's Jason Smith, everybody, with us here on The Hoffman Show on a very busy day. We had the commissioner of the WNBA 2 hours ago. What a show. We had Clinton Yates on the big story in baseball today, where they've rewritten the record books. And then as we were talking to Clinton, the Wizards made Brian Keefe their head coach. We've been talking about it ever since. If you missed any part of the show today, you're going to want to check the podcast, The Hoffman Show. Just search it in your favorite podcast app. And we'll wrap up this here Wednesday edition with real things real people said in real microphones coming up next. the Hoffman Show wrapping up here on the Team 980. Always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on the YouTubes at the Team 980. What a day, as the Wizards have hired Brian Keefe to be their next head coach. We had reaction from Ava Wallace, Chase Hughes. Who else? Jason Smith just joined us. Some of you on the phones at 301-230-09.
Real people.
5 and 11, not very good.
Set into real microphones.
You know, the culture is actually damn good.
All right, I know one of the things that I'm going to do this weekend, which is watch Lewis Hamilton, a British race car driver, but also, I mean, that's such an undersell of Lewis Hamilton. He's a legend, 7-time world champion in Formula One, but British, famously not the spiciest palate, the British, take on the Wings of Death. That's right, Lewis Hamilton's going to be on Hot Ones.
This almost seems like a silly question considering what you do for a living, but are you at all nervous going into this Hot Ones interview?
You know, I've canceled several times.
I know, Lewis. But you know what's nice about you? You did send me a succulent plant one time. You know, that was...
I mean, hey, if you're going to cancel on Sean Evans, you got to him some gift. That dude asks hard questions. So you got to be ready. All right, I'm off tomorrow and Friday. I'll see y'all on Monday, but make sure you listen.